I recently posted a video on gradualism and natural family planning, and it featured a conversation with John Farrell. I'd like to revisit the topic in this video with a chronology of the Church's position on the topic. The Bible says, "And God blessed them, saying, Increase and multiply and fill the earth." But it doesn't continue with any qualification of unless you have grave or serious motives not to do so. Today we'll discuss how up until modern times, the Catholic Church always condemned married couples, limiting the marital act to only certain times of the month in order to avoid having children. St. Augustine wrote extensively on the subject, but for the sake of brevity, I'll only supply a couple of his quotes. "You approve of having a wife, not for the procreation of children, but for the gratification of passion. In marriage, as the marriage law declares, the man and woman come together for the procreation of children." Sometimes natural family planning is used for purposes of performing the marital act during times of fertility in order to enhance having children, and that is a good thing. But based on this quote and the ones that follow, it would seem that the marriage act done for gratification only, but not for the procreation of children, is forbidden. Necessary sexual intercourse for begetting is alone worthy of marriage, but that which goes beyond this necessity no longer follows reason, but lust. There is no exception here to avoid conception for serious motives. Pope St. Gregory the Great wrote, "Husbands and wives are to be admonished to remember that they are joined together for the sake of producing offspring. When giving themselves to immoderate intercourse, they transfer the occasion of procreation to the service of pleasure, to consider that, though they don't go outside of wedlock, yet in wedlock itself they exceed the just dues of wedlock." St. Thomas Aquinas wrote, "It is clear that every emission of the semen is contrary to the good of man, which takes place in a way whereby generation is impossible, and if this is done on purpose, it must be a sin." St. Robert Bellarmine wrote, "The generation of children, together with their proper education, must be had in view if we would make good use of matrimony. But on the contrary, he commits a most grievous sin who seeks only carnal pleasure in it." In a papal bull in 1679, Pope Innocent XI condemned the following proposition: "The act of marriage exercised for pleasure only is entirely free of all fault and venial defect." And the bull was like the syllabus of errors, except there was no syllabus, and the condemnations were listed within the bull itself. In the early 1800s, pamphlets started to be distributed describing what eventually became known as the rhythm method. My guess is that this type of thing had probably been noticed by at least someone for many centuries and passed down. But since such activity was sinful, no one ever wrote about it until after the French Revolution and with the liberalism that ensued. Then something extraordinary happened with the Sacred Penitentiary, which was an arm of the Roman Curia, and it provided guidance for priests hearing confessions. In 1853 and then in 1880, the Sacred Penitentiary suggested that in cases where a couple was already practicing artificial birth control and could not be dissuaded to cease attempting birth regulation, the confessor might morally teach them about periodic abstinence. This didn't receive much attention by the general public at the time because the activities of the Sacred Penitentiary were usually not publicized, but it certainly caused a great deal of confusion in the priesthood. When this became known, the enemies of the Church, of course, latched onto the hypocrisy. The guidance by the Sacred Penitentiary was scandalous. It was not in their power to change the teaching of the Catholic Church. Here's an article from 1927 from Father John A. Ryan, and I've done a video on him before. He was a fairly liberal priest who was a talking head for the Church before the arrival of Fulton J. Sheen, but in this case he faithfully restated the position of the Church. Once men and women have rejected the principle that contraception is bad in itself and always, but once they adopt the opinion that it is good in the presence of hard circumstances, they claim the right to decide for themselves when the circumstances are sufficiently hard. The devastating effect of this persuasion upon social purity and social health needs no elaboration. Then on the last day of 1930, Pope Pius XI issued Casti Connubii, where he faithfully restated the continuous teaching of the Catholic Church. But no reason, however grave, may be put forward by which anything intrinsically against nature may become conformable to nature and morally good. Since, therefore, the conjugal act is destined primarily by nature for the begetting of children, those who in exercising it deliberately frustrate its natural power and purpose sin against nature and committed deed which is shameful and intrinsically vicious. Since natural family planning is done deliberately to frustrate the natural power of the conjugal act, this matter should have been put to rest. And indeed, in many quarters it was. This article came from the Catholic Wire Service and appeared in the Catholic Advance in 1937. Any Catholic woman who practices birth control is not a member in good standing of the Catholic Church, Monsignor Casey said. The Church is not in favor of birth control in any manner, not even the rhythm method. But the liberalism and modernism that had taken a foothold in the Church and was condemned by prior popes was still tainting much of the clergy. Some clergy attached some sort of special meaning that Pope Pius didn't condemn the rhythm method by name. So some bishops, while not publicly endorsing the rhythm method, allowed pamphlets on it to be distributed within their dioceses. Again, this hypocrisy was noticed by the enemies of the Church, and it also sowed the seeds of confusion and doubt among the laity. And here we see that in 1944, Father Edgar Schmieder was quoted as saying that the rhythm method was upright and moral if there was sufficient cause. He claimed that there wasn't any reason why any church representative should consider it otherwise. It got to the point where there were conflicting messages and different issues of single publications. For example, in 1935, the Tablet, which was the diocesan newspaper for the Brooklyn Diocese, printed a story from the Catholic Wire Service stating, "The Church does not endorse the rhythm method." In 1938, the Tablet also faithfully condemned another publication for printing information on the rhythm method. But in 1935, the Tablet, almost in a schizophrenic manner, also printed an article stating that the rhythm theory was not contraception prevention in either principle or method. But then, in 1951, all hell broke loose. Pope Pius XII gave a speech to Italian midwives. It wasn't an encyclical, so it had no magisterial authority in it, but he contradicted ancient and long-standing church teaching, and he said, "Serious motives, such as those which not rarely arise from medical, eugenic, economic, and social so-called indications, may exempt a husband and wife from the obligatory positive debt for a long period or even for the entire period of matrimonial life. From this it follows that the observance of the natural sterile periods may be lawful from the moral viewpoint, and it is lawful in the conditions mentioned." This speech, of course, had no more force than the wild ramblings Pope Francis gives to reporters. If Pope Pius had attempted to state all of this in an encyclical, he would have contradicted church teaching, and he would have joined what later became the ranks of the post-Vatican II popes. My guess is that he knew that since he couldn't state this message in an encyclical, he decided to just give it in a speech. Pope Pius XII did not show heroic virtue in this case. He followed the world instead of leading it. And this has reverberated down to the present day when most Catholics, including myself until very recently, don't know Catholic teaching on natural family planning. If it is used to avoid having children, it is condemned, regardless of whether the couple has serious or grave motives. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video. I'll be back again within a week with another one. But in the meantime, please check out my Facebook page and my Twitter page. Every day I post additional content that you won't find on this YouTube channel. And also, please pray for the church.
Get so disgusted when I try to kiss you. I guess I don't feel you like I used to do. Little by little, I'm losing you, but I can see. Bit by bit, your love slips away from me.